Back to the line, we have another angle on open government to discuss for Sunshine Week. The Associated Press reported this week that requests for emails from top elected officials in New Mexico and across the country indicated that lawmakers and elected officials are not using email to conduct business. They're opting instead to discuss important issues in person or by phone. Tom Garrity, that seems logical. No one would have an issue with that. You want a quick response to something, you call them up, figure it out, all that kind of thing. However, it does not leave much of a trail, does it? What does that do for the rest of us? Is that a transparency issue, or is that just a reasonable choice issue?
And we have, what, an hour on this segment?
Right.
You know, when you look at the whole issue of transparency, obviously the Associated Press had this big national push.
Right.
And so they did, had the same tests in each state. And, I'm glad to see that, that New Mexico's leaders really kind of followed through and did what they were supposed to do.
That's right.
There is an issue and question of transparency at times, though, when you wait until the 15th day. If you have 15 days, is that really being transparent? I understand that sometimes journalists have very solid requests that are thousands of pages that you need to be able to develop. But when there's a consistent pattern and practice of waiting until the last day, I think that raises some concern. So there's two. So the conversation is one. I think the expectation of a calendar item having notes and minutes from a meeting is unrealistic. I have an Outlook calendar. I'm sure we all do, and we just put who, if we're going to be meeting someone, if so, who that is and where it's going to be, not necessarily the results of that meeting. So I think that open meetings, that there's a level of expectation, but we have to measure it against what reality is.
Eric Griego, email. Here's my summation on this. It seems to me the reason people don't use email because people get blown up by email all the time. There's always an email trail that gets people into big trouble here. Do people just feel elected folks just feel naturally afraid of email?
Well, I think part of this is that people use other, most legislators, I can tell you, nobody uses their official NM Legis account. First of all, when I was up there, it was difficult even to access it from anywhere else other than the Capitol. So it's probably just because I'm pretty low tech, but so. Yeah, I think there's many legislators who use email. They use a different email account that's accessible. If it's really official business, there's ways that you can sort of make sure. But I think this idea that everybody's thinking about, oh, I don't want anything on the record, and I'm going to be like having secret meetings or anything. I don't think that's the reality. Reality is we have a legislature without paid staff that are, and if they're good and they're actually trying to respond to constituents, it's very difficult to try to expect them to. The other thing now with modern campaigns is if there's an issue you care about, you'll get 200-300 emails, for example, and to really expect the legislator or the governor or anybody to say, okay, I've got 600 emails. The governor might have a staffer to do that, but like none of the legislators, even the leadership, doesn't really have the luxury of doing that. So sometimes it's not a question of trying to hide anything; it's just a question of sheer ability to get to emails. Now, I do agree in terms of transparency that we should know about more about. These meetings and these dinners that are happening. I think if the public knew more about, and that's not necessarily an email issue, that's an issue of, for example, you can go on the NM Legislate right now and figure out who's having dinners, who's having events, and how much they're, how elaborate they are, and so on. So that's all accessible to the website. Now that's if you're a wonk and want to go on to the NM Legis website or you're a lobbyist. For Joe Public, it isn't as easy as people think to really find out what their legislators are up to. The last thing I'll say is my legislators, when I need something around the community or whatever, most of the good ones have an email address that you can get them quickly, and a lot of them you can text them, not just because it's me. Even the ones I don't know, I'm like, hey, did you know such and such happened? What's going on with the bill? And I think it's easy. One of the good things about our system, it's easy to get to our legislators if you really want to get to them. At a personal level, if you're a constituent or if you're,
That's right. Mary, pick up on that as well because, it seems to me, we're a high-touch state. You want to get something done, you really need to look somebody in the eye and talk to them. Or you need to hear their voice. This is something there's a way we communicate here that maybe is not necessarily email friendly. Would you agree with that as well?
I agree with that, and I think that we also have to remember that our legislators have day jobs, and they are not legislators all year, working all year in Santa Fe. Sometimes it's 30 days or 60 days. So maybe they're used to communicating with their personal or their other work email address, or they're used to texting or phone calling. So I don't think that there's any kind of nefarious thing here either.
Laura, it's not legally required to do this, but should it be? To use email, your official email?
Well, I think that's administratively burdensome
Yeah.
for a legislature that we're just not, if you compare our legislature to other states, you know, we're really behind the times here. And I've had experience in Arizona, I've had experience in working in the California legislature, I've had experience interacting with the Rhode Island legislature. We're definitely behind the times here. And, you know, the other thing is that there's a huge, in my opinion, a big generational divide at the legislature. You know, there are folks who are younger and very comfortable with technology, and they use, you know, they've got their computer, they've got their iPad, they've got everything on them, they're always wired. And then there's folks who just don't do that stuff, you know, and I lovingly
Elected
call them
folks, you're saying.
dinosaurs, but they're technology dinosaurs. They just don't do that stuff. And I think there's something, you know, good about that too. They're able to be very effective without needing to be connected all the time on the phone or on your email. So I think we have to adapt to that. And so for me, in terms of transparency, I'm less concerned about the email and more concerned about the fact that we don't have a public record in New Mexico. When you're actually at a meeting, the only thing that gets recorded at an official meeting where there's a vote taken is the vote. Whereas in other places like Arizona, they actually have minutes from the meeting. And so most people, when you think about having a public meeting about something where there's a vote taken, there's minutes. And so like when I've been on boards, you take minutes of your activity. There's nothing like that at the legislature. And that to me is a bigger concern because you want to try to have a legislative record, especially when it comes down to interpreting the way something occurred. We simply don't have that here in New Mexico. So there's a long way to go before we start to be concerned about how we're not putting things on email or details that normally most professionals wouldn't put in a calendar. I think we need to move towards transparency in actual business meetings first.
That makes sense. That makes sense. I appreciate your broadening that out a little bit, putting that context on it, because Tom, you know, perception is a difficulty, and you know, it's hard. I don't see how one can make one use email if it's just not a comfort. I mean, Eric makes a good point. I can't think of any legislator I've ever tried to contact in the past 2 or 3 years. I couldn't just text. You get an immediate response, almost immediate response, you know? Email can be sort of bulky, so are we looking at the wrong things? Again, in the context of Sunshine Week, in the context of we're trying to get to a place where we want to be able to see as much of this as possible, is it a requirement in your view?
Well, if I understand the question correctly, you know, is using email a requirement?
Yeah,
No.
you wouldn't go that far? Okay.
I wouldn't go that far. So, but what I would, you know, look, the Inspection of Public Records Act was developed, and it's funny, we've been on both sides of this particular issue. Way before email was developed.
That's right.
And so, you know, everybody's been worrying, well, what do you do about the, you know, document? Now that we have a lot of documentation, there are people who say, well, there's not enough documentation of the old processes and stuff. I mean, I think that the intent of Sunshine Week is great, and you know, and there are a lot of great laws and acts that are in place to support it. You know, the challenge is if you have a bad egg who just wants to set up whatever kind of, you know, separate email servers or email accounts to, you know, kind of divert the system, then those people, you need to set up things to catch those folks.
That's right.
Just in the same way that the Attorney General or somebody would catch, you know, folks who are doing wrong or perceived wrong. You know, I think, you know, and there's a premise though, and I'm kind of going off on a rant here, is that there's that legislators are bad. And I don't think that's the case. I mean, legislators are giving up their time. I think they all have the public good in their heart. But all these laws and acts are set up to catch those, you know, the occasional stray person who doesn't play by the rules.
That's right. Good point there. In a few minutes, this week's Line Opinion panelists share their take on a recent report on tax credits and subsidies for big businesses here in New Mexico.